I left my small Southern Baptist church to go start studying denominations. I want to compare them to the Bible and see which one actually holds closest to the truth of Scripture. So far in my search, I've attended a few Lutheran services, I've watched some online, and I have also visited a Catholic church. If you'll permit me about 30 seconds, I want to take a step away from actually talking about those two denominations and actually just discuss something that I've been dealing with online and on YouTube and TikTok and all these platforms. And I know we should not be getting our theology strictly from these platforms. We need to read Scripture. I think we also need to read interpretations of Scripture and try to understand what the Greek says, the context, do a proper hermeneutic. But anyway, I've heard so many people that just say that if you don't go to my church or believe this specific doctrine or submit to these things, then anathema or you're perverting the gospel. So Galatians applies and you're going to be anathema that way. and it's like everyone is just stating that they have the truth and no one else. This is more specific in water baptism. There's sinless perfectionism. Also submitting your mind, heart, soul to the Catholic Church. And it's really difficult for me, for example, to believe in the sinlessness of Mary, or I'm not even sure if I could technically submit to the doctrine, or if I'd have to really believe it to technically be able to be a part of the. So I don't think I'm having ecclesial anxiety or whatever it's called when you're just fearing for your salvation, but I'm so confused. I feel like opening and broadening my horizons have just shown how much I don't know. But every time I read Scripture, I try to not have a biased lens, but it's so difficult not to see the exact same things that I've seen before. That being said, I've learned about aorist tense, I've learned about present tense and some other stuff. So let's move on, though, and outside of my knowledge and discussion that I'm gaining, specifically to Catholicism and a little bit of Lutheran. So most of my online study has been more towards the Catholic Church and listening to apologetics like Jesus and whatnot. Or maybe even better, no offense to Noah, but Trent Horn, maybe Joe Heschmeyer or Catholic Answers, and really just trying to listen to their explanations of doctrine. Here's a few things that I still feel like are kind of left unanswered for me that I'm going to have to dig in deeper and understand. Number one, sinlessness of Mary. That's a hard one for my head to wrap around. I understand the idea of earlier imputed grace before she was born to preserve her and keep her, though she was saved, she was technically done so by a very specific divine act. And I'm not holding that God could not do that. It's just, it doesn't explicitly state that in Scripture. And then the verse they use, I think it's ke keritomene, I may be saying that wrong, and then a different form of it used in a separate bit of Scripture that actually talks about redemption and a few other qualities. Since they relate these two terms and say, okay, because of those two terms being the same, and one being salvific and one being grace specifically imparted to Mary, they're saying that she is sinless. And I don't necessarily fall into that category because I'm like, it doesn't necessarily mean it just because the two Greek words are the same that you can apply it to the other. But they're saying that it's a dogma and you must, I think it might have been ex cathedra, that you must believe that to be Catholic. I don't yet, to be honest, but I mean, I'm open to it. I'm not upset or angry or I can't submit, but it doesn't fit well intellectually with me just yet by any means, because I feel like I can definitely show other Scripture that has only a few Greek words, but we can get into that another time, maybe on a more specific. There's also the Council of Florence and Vatican II. One is saying that a schismatic cannot inherit the kingdom. They must be joined to the one, I don't know that it says the one Holy Roman Apostolic Catholic Church, but they must be joined to the church, and the visible church meaning the Roman Catholic Church, before they unalive. And then you get to Vatican II, and all of a sudden, Jewish people, Muslims, schismatics, in the sense of Protestantism, they can be saved in certain circumstance. I don't know if it's just invincible ignorance or technically your upbringing or just your intellect kind of holding you back from accepting Catholic doctrine, but you may be saved in those cases. Though those seem kind of contradictory, just to be 100% honest. I've heard a couple of explanations that just didn't seem to fit well. I can go into those, but let's do those on another video. I don't think I said this earlier, but the Matthew 16 verses in Aramaic saying Cephas and Cephas, and then they translate it to Greek and it says Petros and Petras, like a feminine versus masculine, and some people rely on that grammatical difference to state one versus another. for whether Peter was technically the rock or his confession. But I found it interesting that most of the Catholics, they continually quote church father, church father, church father, church father. And then the early church fathers, I think, maybe, it depends on how you define that, like before 400 or 600 AD. It seemed that there was very inconsistency. They believe Christ was the rock that was being spoke of. The statement of faith was the rock. And then like 25% of them or something said Peter was the rock. So it seemed to be actually in a minority view that Peter was the rock in that. But the Catholic Church very clearly teaches that is the truth. And that's how they kind of slowly established papal supremacy. Una Sanctum, I think, I can't remember. Basically, the Pope is the emperor. But I did watch a recent debate with Jesus and Whatnot and Redeemed Zoomer, and I thought they both did a pretty good job. I thought they were pretty charitable even to each other. And one of them was Jesus and Whatnot, or Noah, was stating things about Aaron and that typology between Aaron and the almonds, and relating that to, I'm not explaining this well, I'm sorry, relating that to Peter and the high priest and the mountain of transfiguration versus Moses bringing Aaron up, and Peter having a special role in that. And it's some of it's convincing in the sense of typology, but of course that doesn't mean exact one-to-one. Like if this happened here, then that means they are this. And like there's differences, like the sacrificial system. They're not necessarily going to sacrifice goats and lamb and sheep because we have the sacrifice of Christ. So that wouldn't necessarily be Peter's. He was specially told to feed my sheep and other things. But papal supremacy, submission, and mind, body, and will, and just some of those requirements, and otherwise being anathema, meaning basically condemned. It's really hard for me to believe that basically after the Council of Trent, it seemed to just be everybody is anathema. Anathema here, anathema, 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 anathema. And it's just too much. I don't know how many people made it to near the end of this video, but right now I am just absolutely confused about the Catholic Church. Oh, one more big thing. This is probably the most important part. Works. So like it very much so seems like works with like faith and something that works in love. Like there's so many explanations that basically said Jesus is sufficient, but you have to also do these things to be saved. And that doesn't make any sense from Vatican II. Obviously, maybe they're talking about the ordinary means of salvation, but it's still really confusing. I know that once we add works to salvation, that it is no longer grace, and we would have something to boast about. So needgod.net, Ryan, and some other people would say, oh, these people aren't even saved because they believe. But once again, kind of falls into like a Galatian situation versus 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3-4, I think, if I remember correctly. Actually defining what the gospel is, and if you pervert the gospel in some way, how does that happen? But oddly enough, Paul very much so warns that if you try to rely on circumcision and you think that's what saves you, you have to follow the whole law, and Christ is really not efficacious for you. And that's a big deal because some people argue, for example, well, baptism isn't a work by you, it's technically a work of God or by someone else. But the trouble there is it's like an extra requirement where you have to physically move, locate yourself, etc. And I don't know how to define technical works. Like if I have to go get baptized, but it has to be on the top of Mount Everest, and I have to climb Mount Everest or be flown out there, would that constitute a work? Or am I completely dead in my sins and I have to, like, anything I do is technically not real, like I'm not technically working at all? I know there's a way that they explain it, but it's really difficult to wrap my head around because circumcision is done by someone else. So if that is a work that is done by someone else, and then baptism is someone putting you in water and bringing you back up, and they're saying that's a moment of justification, or you also have to partake of the Eucharist because it is the body and blood of Christ, and that Christ meant it not just in remembrance, but in a grace salvific thing. Oh, I want to talk about so much, but this is basically my update. There's a lot of confusing things about how they define works and salvation, and I think there's a big difference. I also see some literature. I think I heard, this may be a rumor, that Catholics would marry people who are homosexual if they were given the ability to. And it's like, How did that happen? Like it seems to be somewhat stepping away from conservatism. Not that I care about conservative versus progressive. Progressive things are sometimes great, but I kind of fall more into the conservative because I feel like it flex script. This is what most people probably call yapping. Great to meet you. If you're new, thank you for those who watched who have been here before. Lutheranism or Lutherans, I honestly have only dove in a little bit into their doctrine, and I do have a small catechism here, and I'm trying to get into baptism, some other information to try to what they believe more. But it's hard. I actually started reading the first part of the small catechism, which was a mistake because it was very fundamental, basic things that I kind of already knew, basically. Not all of it, but I mean, most of it. And then the later part seemed to be more specific and deeper in the theology, like actually quoting scripture and not just giving basic explanation. So I appreciated that. What else is there really to say? I don't really think there is much more to say. I doubt this will even get viewed much, but at least I got to talk to the few dedicated people who want to keep up with the search. But sorry that I don't have really good conclusive information yet. Because I thought this would be like a 6-month thing, but and it's already been 2 or 3 months, and I feel like I barely scratched them. Thank you guys. Hope you have a great rest of your night and watching.